Good morning. It is an honor and a privilege to be in this loving spiritual place, this community. Thank you for welcoming me so sweetly and warmly. It's a real honor to enter a sacred space like this. It's been a few years since I've been here, so thanks so much. And I want to speak today about gratitude and why gratitude matters. As we just sang that beautiful song, Open My Eyes, the eyes of my heart. A curious lyric, isn't it? As if our heart had eyes, but we know exactly what it means about that shift into perception. I often think of God that way. It isn't a proximity problem, it's a perception problem. It's not that God is far away, it's just that we don't see what is and what we are. So, in the unity movement, and in New Thought in general, there's really just one central idea, isn't there? There's one central premise. It's right in the word unity. And that central premise is that ultimate reality is not a separate reality, above, beyond, or outside of us, to be sought, to be longed for as if it were a long-lost reality. Unity teaches that there is only one power and presence, and that we are that power and presence as well. Ultimate reality is what we are, and the portal, the opening to this ultimate reality, is our own consciousness, our own mind, our own awareness. That's why we put so much emphasis around here on things like the experience of the individual, on practices like meditation, like contemplative affirmative prayer. So in New Thought, in Unity, in our friends in the religious science or Centers for Spiritual Living communities, the Unitarian community, so many other wonderful groups meeting all over town today. In that point of view, we do not receive our salvation from doctrine or from liturgy or from the sacrificial death of a first century rabbi. It isn't even salvation we seek, because we don't accept the claim that we are damned. We are not looking to be rescued, we are looking to be realized. And those are two different things. Plenty of churches talk about damnation, salvation, and the needing to be saved. But other communities talk about the need instead, maybe it's just a different emphasis, the need to realize the reality that we are already fully participating in. So there's something in the way, though. There's something blocking this. There's something in the way of this realization. This unmediated God consciousness that is our birthright, that's at the root of the very idea of unity or unity consciousness, what the Fillmores taught. And the thing that's in our way is that ungrateful, frightened, outmoded structure of our own consciousness. We are in our way. The way we habitually think is in our way. And that's why gratitude matters, because the consciousness of gratitude is going to dissolve those outmoded modes of consciousness, those outdated modes of consciousness that are interfering with our depth experience of the oneness of the sacred reality that this is. Frankly and simply put, without gratitude, the door to God consciousness is closed. We live instead in fear and scarcity consciousness. So we've all had experience of gratitude. We know exactly what it is. It comes in very brief waves at certain times, like when you get something you want and you feel, oh, I'm so grateful. But it's a lot trickier, isn't it, to kind of conjure that consciousness of gratitude when you're afraid and when you're facing real lack and scarcity in your life. So why is the consciousness of gratitude so difficult to maintain? Since we obviously know from our own experience its tremendous transformative power, its healing salve. We know we like it, but we can't seem to stay in it. The consciousness of gratitude. I think there are three reasons why it's so difficult to maintain. three reasons why our consciousness is mostly negative and mostly focused on scarcity. It's almost as if negativity and scarcity consciousness are our default settings. That's just where we go back to after those moments of reverie when we're feeling all in love with everything and full of gratitude. But, all over the world, in the northern hemisphere anyway, in this time of year, October into November, for tens of thousands of years, we've been celebrating the harvest and the abundance of this season. So before we can talk about the solution, we have to think about the problem. So I think we have three reasons why we are so removed from gratitude. And I'm going to draw this out of really contemporary psychological research. The first reason I think we have trouble staying grateful is something called negativity bias. Psychological research shows that our brains seem to be hardwired to emphasize negative experiences. I don't know if you've noticed that in your own experience. The brain reacts much more strongly to a negative experience than to a positive one. Do you notice that you remember the insults that you have received better than you remember the praise that you've received? This is a structure of consciousness. We don't freely choose to do that. It's the way this computer is built. It's just much more interested in the bad stuff than the good stuff. And we'll get to why that may be in a moment. So even when positive experiences outnumber negative experiences, we still focus and linger on the negative ones. Other studies show that when your mind wanders, it tends to land on those traumatic negative memories and not on the good memories. And that's why we're so skilled, I think, at horribilizing the future. That's my favorite new word. It's, we talk a lot about anxiety and worry. You know what horribilizing is. You're very good at it, and so am I. It is conjuring up these fictitious futures where everything is just disastrously, horribly wrong and messed up. And then you wake up at 3 a.m. and put in a good 90 minutes worrying about that thing that will never happen. So we are master storytellers of hideous futures that rarely occur. And again, this is just to recognize this is the structure of consciousness. There may have been an evolutionary advantage to that, but this is what psychologists call our negative bias. And this is why the consciousness of scarcity is our default setting. We don't notice what we have. We focus with really weird, narrow, laser-like intensity on what we do not yet have. It's worth noticing that. Because if you don't examine these habitual structures of consciousness, you are their prisoner. And we want to be free. Now, maybe this negativity bias, as I mentioned a moment ago, has really ancient roots. Maybe it came out of our kind of evolutionary process. 150,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens walked out of Africa and scattered around the world, I can imagine two cavemen 150,000 years ago walking across a meadow, and one of them was really, really worried, and he was looking around and super anxious about the saber-toothed tiger that may or may not be, probably not be, lurking in the bushes. And in absolute intense horribilizing of a possible future, he was hyper-vigilant and alert, and his friend, the other caveman, who was a kind of a mellow dude, he's like, dude, why are you always freaking out all the time? You should just chill. Nothing's going to happen. And then boom, the saber-toothed tiger kills that guy. And eats him, and he never has any children. And the other guy had lots of children, and he raised them all up to be worriers. And I'm afraid, my friends, that you and I are the descendants of thousands and thousands of generations of people who perfected anxiety. And in this way, I think evolutionary biology has selected anxiety as a favorable trait because it helps us. All your genes want to do is pass on their genes to more genes. And again, if you're not conscious to this, then you are sort of enslaved by this. So what if anxiety and negativity were naturally selected? That means it's going to take a little bit of work to undo that default setting. Okay, I mentioned 3. There's a second reason I think that we're not very good at practicing gratitude all the time. We talked about negativity bias. Here's the second one. Psychologists call it confirmation bias. Confirmation bias works like this, that as we assess evidence and information, we unconsciously diminish the value or ignore any evidence that contradicts my current opinion while exaggerating any evidence that supports my current opinion. No matter where you are on political or ideological spectrums, we all do this. Any evidence that challenges my rigid point of view gets ignored. And any evidence that supports my point of view, I'm like, yeah, see, I'm right. This is called confirmation bias. We're not very objective at all, it turns out. We think we're being really objective. It's not true. So in other words, let's put this in a more maybe spiritual or philosophical way. The mind seems to fight very hard to hold on to its current mode of being, its current point of view. It likes to not change. It likes to stay where it is. That's bad news vis-a-vis the first quality we just talked about, negativity bias. Your mind wants to stay there. We like to stay where we are. There's a beautiful line in the Jewish book of wisdom, the Talmud, that we do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. Do you feel the difference there? So combining negativity bias with confirmation bias, maybe now we're starting to see why it is so hard to break out of this negative mold, why the mind loves to hold on to its negative point of view. So how can the consciousness of gratitude survive, let alone thrive, under those conditions? It can't. That's why the consciousness of gratitude is such a fleeting experience. We're really fighting against a structure that's been built over tens of thousands of years. There's a wonderful book that I'm reading right now called Why Buddhism is True. Pretty provocative title. And he comes at it from this point of view. Why the meditation practices that many of us do in all of our spiritual families developed as a way to undo these consciousness structures that make us suffer so much. And there's a third reason why I think it's so hard to be grateful, and that one is called hedonic adaptation. So hedonism, right? You've heard of that. The Greek word hedon means pleasure. So a hedonist is someone who just pursues pleasure alone. So we're not really talking about that, but we're using the concept of pleasure. That psychologists notice that you and I, think about this, we have a weird way of adapting to pleasure or any kind of reward. When we receive something that we've been wanting, that promotion, that raise, that new car, that new house, that new spouse, when you get that great new thing, new pair of shoes, whatever, when you get that new thing, there's a little burst of dopamine, right? You feel a little bit high. Dopamine is an interesting compound your body produces. And when you get that new car, there's a lot of dopamine, and it lasts a couple of days, and then the bills start coming, and, it just sort of, it's called hedonic adaptation. You just adapt to the new reality, and you go back to your old happiness set point. You think that next thing that you're going to get is going to ratchet your happiness up to a higher level, and it's going to stay there, but the proof is otherwise. The proof is you're going to get that temporary buzz, and then you're going to go back to the set point. That's called hedonic adaptation. It's fascinating. It's also called the hedonic treadmill because you have to keep running and chasing the next thing. Again, Buddhism focuses like a laser on this whole problem that our suffering is caused by craving. And every time we get that new thing, we think, this time it's really going to work. I'm going to really be happier. But then it doesn't seem to work. So, here's some other research about this. Even lottery winners, Even lottery winners, after the big win, they return to their happiness set point. They're in a bigger house, but they're still their same regular old melancholic self. Here's the flip side. Even quadriplegics, this is challenging to hear. Even people who are paralyzed in an accident, quadriplegics. Imagine what a disaster that would be to your happiness. Even quadriplegics return to their set point of as happy as they were before the accident, after the shock wears off. So, if we combine these three things, negativity bias, confirmation bias, hedonic adaptation, it's easy to see why the consciousness of gratitude is so difficult to maintain. We look out, we see our world negatively, we overlook the evidence of our abundance, and no matter what we receive, we return to our set point, which for most of us is a fairly anxious, worried state of mind. Our natural state, endless craving and the mistaken notion that when we get that next thing, we'll be permanently happy. Even though we have all this evidence behind us that never has worked so far. So as students of unity, as students of New Thought, we know that we have to spend time in our spiritual path focusing on these structures of consciousness because our life is created by our thoughts. As Buddha said in the opening of his famous book, the Dhammapada, our life is a product of our... It sounds something like out of what Myrtle Fillmore or Ernest Holmes would have written. Buddha said, our life is a product of our thoughts. My thoughts of yesterday built my life of today. My thoughts of today are building my life of tomorrow. Our lives are a product of our thoughts, said the Buddha, 2,500 years ago. And he's right. This is why this is urgent business that I'm thinking about with you today. And yet we know that the consciousness of gratitude is the medicine for this disease. Cultivating consciously the consciousness of gratitude rolls back the death grip those three problems have on us. This is how we transform the structures of our consciousness. And that if we could just retrain our mind to renounce negativity or to more objectively assess the copious evidence of our abundance and to consciously choose a new set point, imagine if we could do that. Could we choose a new set point? Could we reach in there and shift it? Well, that's what all this spiritual work is for. It's not just to stay stuck. It's to grow. And if we could do that, we would see the world entirely differently, which is another way of saying we would literally change the world, because what is the world but our perception or our consciousness of it? This seems to me to be interesting work and urgent work. So how do we overcome these three maladaptations? How do we undo 150,000 years of evolutionary biology? Scarcity consciousness, negativity bias. I think we do it by cultivating the consciousness of gratitude, by choosing gratitude. But as you all know, and as we've already been thinking through, choosing gratitude is not a one-time thing. You don't just choose it on a Tuesday and then you're good for the rest of your days. We know that doesn't work. We have to choose it again and again and again and again and build a new habit. You can't overcome a set point with a casual commitment and a fleeting intention. You have to come at this like a soldier, right? Like a warrior. And in a way, it is like war. We're fighting for our life here. We're fighting for our freedom. We're fighting for our awakening and for our joy. And you have to be relentless. So how does a soldier train? A soldier is willing to sacrifice their comfort for a greater good. This isn't maybe going to feel so good for a while. All that seeking pleasure and seeking feeling good hasn't really worked anyway. A soldier puts some muscle into it. She creates new habits and she practices them with discipline and diligently, even when she doesn't want to. It's not just when you feel like it, right? But as if your life depends on it. And a soldier doesn't just train to do it for themselves. They're doing it for their comrades in arms, just as you and I must cultivate our consciousness of gratitude, not just for our own benefit, but in order to benefit our spouses. Do you think if we showed up less whiny and more grateful, it would improve our relationships? Just a thought. So our conscious effort to cultivate gratitude would enhance the lives of everyone whose lives we touch. Our children would benefit. Our marriages would benefit. Our colleagues would benefit. They are quite tired, I assure you, of our negativity, our whininess, our grumpiness, our complaining, how we walk into a room with 100 beautiful things and one ugly thing and we go, look at that ugly thing. And you feel so clever because you saw the ugly thing. What a weird obsession this is. To scan forever the entire perceptual field, problem, 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 problem. I'm so clever. This is a disease of the ego, according to the Buddha. To walk around proclaiming judgment on everything. Oh, aren't you clever? Instead of childlike wonder at all of the beautiful things that you overlook on your way to find the problem. Not that we shouldn't address problems, don't misunderstand. Obviously, problem solving is all of our work. This is about what we spend most of our time doing. So the easiest way, let's talk about a practical practice. I mean, if I had 2 hours, I would go, which thankfully I don't, for all of us here. But as we sort of move into the last few thoughts, I just wanted to share with you some practices. How could one do this? Because it's one thing to sit here and go, yeah, I should be more grateful. Okay, now what? Well, I'll just share with you a really obvious one that I bet a lot of you already do. Have you ever kept a gratitude journal? It's a remarkable process. Don't be fooled by the simplicity of this practice. And don't underestimate its power just because it seems a little corny, a little Oprah. Like, I'm going to get up every morning. And you know what? Don't even start now. Make a commitment to January 1st, 2018. Give you a couple more months of like full-on whininess and complaining. That'll just like you always do the holidays, just right on through. Christmas is ruined, all that kind of stuff. But on January 1st, how about you get a blank book and a pencil, and every morning when you get up, you spend 5 minutes writing something you're grateful for. And after a few days, you run out of all the big stuff, my kids, my wife, my house, my job. Then you start drilling down like the moon. I'm really grateful for the moon. Or I'm grateful for the sound of my old dog snoring at my feet. Or I'm grateful for that Mahler symphony I heard in the radio when I was stuck in traffic yesterday. Or whatever. Here's what happens, though, when you keep a gratitude journal. It's not about the book. It's not about keeping a record. That's not the purpose of a gratitude journal. The purpose is this. You know that every morning, every 24 hours, you have a writing assignment. And that you're going to have to write about something you were grateful for yesterday when you wake up tomorrow morning. And guess what that does? Guess what happens when you go looking for things to be grateful for? You find them. This changes the consciousness that you bring into every room, into every meeting, into every conversation, into every problem. Because tomorrow morning you're going to look back and go, yeah, I got all kinds of things to write about. My point is simply this. After 3 weeks, you feel better. Imagine if you did this for a whole year. You start to create a new habit. And that habit is the consciousness of gratitude. It's sometimes called I don't know if other people use this phrase, but I call it the camera effect. Do you ever travel and then you take pictures? And when you're traveling and you're taking pictures, it sometimes affects the way you travel. You go to places where you know there's going to be better pictures. Or anytime you turn a corner, you're thinking, should I take a picture of this? Is the light just right? Is the composition good? Do I want to grab this for later? My point is, with a camera around your neck or in your pocket, you are always looking for the next photograph. It almost interferes with your travel. It almost interferes with your enjoyment because you're on the job. You're looking for the next picture. And in that same way, if you keep a gratitude journal, I promise you, after 3 weeks, you'll have a new habit. You will walk into every situation not looking for problems and scarcity, but looking for the abundance, the beauty, the undeserved grace of the world. That starts to just shimmer through. And again, it's not the world that has changed at all. It is this that has changed because you have consciously constructed a new habit. So in case you need a little more evidence that the consciousness of gratitude is objectively warranted, let me just toss you, 9 or 10 quick little statistics that I got from the Oxfam website about the world that you may or may not already be aware of. Did you know that half of the people on Earth, that's about 3.6 billion people, live on less than $2 a day? Think about that. Half the planet, half of humanity. On January 1st, they get $712. And they are from this $712, you must live the entire year. This is your housing, your food, your medical care, your education, your clothing. In San Diego, $700 lasts about a day, if you're counting rent and utilities and all that sort of stuff. Do you feel a little bit richer now? Half the people. And it gets worse, right? 20%, 1 out of 5 people on Earth has to live on $1 a day. 40% of the people on Earth do not have indoor plumbing. I bet after this church meeting, you're going to go home to an apartment or a home where drinkable water comes out of a pipe magically in several rooms in your house. And it's hot and cold. That is a real luxury in the world. That there's a flush toilet, indoor plumbing. In so much of the world that is not, you have to travel to get water. And the sewage just goes in a bucket thrown out in the middle of the street where it goes down a culvert down the road into the stream where you wash your clothes. We live like kings and queens here. But we don't think that way. But stepping back and objectively looking at how the rest of the world works. How about this? 95% of the people on Earth, 95% of the people on Earth do not own a car. That's hard to believe around San Diego, because in California it seems like everybody has 2. And they're all in your way. But when you just divide the number of cars on Earth by the number of people, that's the number you get. The United States, which makes up about 4.5% of the planet, 96% of humanity does not live in the United States. We're a tiny little sliver. But we own 35% of the cars. Only 5% of the planet owns a computer. Do you have a computer at home? Only 20% of the human race has a smartphone. Do you have a smartphone? So therefore, if you have indoor plumbing, a car, a smartphone, and a computer, you are in the wealthiest elite of the entire planet. I bet you walked in here not thinking that you were the wealthy elite. Because you're comparing yourself to somebody who has more than you, right? That's the game. Even my wealthy, prosperous friends, they're always looking upstairs at that guy who's got way more than they do. It's a weird thing that we do, this hedonic treadmill. So gratitude is objective accuracy and negativity bias is not. Does that make sense? Gratitude is objective accuracy. Your life is abundant, factually. Negativity bias is not accurate. So learning to embody the consciousness of gratitude is just a gift that you give yourself, your loved ones, and your friends. And so I hope that you will consider this as an invitation to now finally liberate yourself from these outmoded structures of consciousness that no longer serve our good. In fact, keep us away from that higher reality that we are. As we started off this morning thinking, I think that the consciousness of gratitude opens the door to God consciousness. So let's keep that door to God consciousness wedged open with the consciousness of gratitude. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.